Stranger Stories.
Never miss another strange story. Subscribe and hit the bell. Sit back and get comfortable. I have a few stories to share with you. Welcome and good night. We all have at least one story about a party that did not go as planned. The following stories are no different. Tonight, I'm hosting my fellow narrator, Demon Core. Don't forget to check his channel out at the end of this video. And with that said, let's move on to the stories. So, I was on a holiday with my boyfriend and his family. We hung with his stepsister a lot, due to her being a similar age with a similar interest in alcohol. Oh, the beauty of all-inclusive holidays. This one night, we all have drinks, and we leave the hotel to hang out at the beach directly opposite to us. With food stalls and music, the atmosphere was very busy and friendly, and we noticed a large group of fellow teenagers. They were talking and laughing, so we decided to go over and join in. The group mainly consisted of Italians, and they were excited by our English accent and happy involving us in their conversation. We mainly talked to three guys, as their English was better than the others. I'm a somewhat shy person, not so much anymore, but back then I was 17 and particularly shy at this point of my life, so I hadn't joined too much into the conversation. I was feeling uncomfortable, not because anything weird, just because I felt anxious socially. After a while of chatting with these people and laughing, one of the guys, who looked around 21 or 22, claimed they were all headed to a party. Some people in the group cheered at the prospect of the party, and shortly after, a car drove over to pick them up. The majority of the people either jumped in the car, driving off cheering and shouting, or simply walked in the same direction as the car. We were left with a 21 to 22-year-old, as I mentioned earlier. He was quite tall and had a heavy build. He told us he would lead us to the party, as we'd been asked to join them all. We looked at each other and nodded our head in agreement. I wasn't too keen on going, but my boyfriend and his stepsister were, and I knew that there was going to be a lot of people there. I thought there would be no harm in attending a party with fellow teens. The guy starts leading us down streets, telling us how he has lived here for 2 years, and how he loves it here. Note that we were not walking in the same direction as the car and the other people, but I put that down as maybe he was taking us through a shortcut. After about 10-15 minutes of walking, the guy starts getting a bit confused and was looking around as if he didn't know which direction to take next. I found this odd, seeing as he claimed to have lived here for 2 years. He leads us around another 10 minutes or so, looking dumbfounded and more confused by the minute. But finally, he says, "Down this street," and we arrive outside of an apartment building. It was about 3 stories high, with a rusty old gate we were led through into the elevator. "The party's just up there, in my apartment, 2nd floor," the guy says, pressing the number 2 on the elevator. The doors shut tight, and we began moving upwards. This was when my senses kicked in hard. Something felt very off to me, and had been since the guy was confused with his directions. The lift was rusty and old, and was groaning as it slowly trundled upwards. I think it was at that point that my boyfriend and his stepsister finally realized something wasn't quite right, and began believing my complaints I had been making while walking to this apartment. After a painfully slow and shaky minute in the elevator, that felt more like 10 minutes, we came to a stop, and the doors opened to face another door, wooden and locked. The guy takes out his keys and opens the door. The door swings open to reveal a hallway with 5 doors in it, 2 on each side and 1 at the end. This is the exact moment I realized one simple thing. We need to get out of here right now. We need to leave at any cost. Something is not right, and I'm not going to be the one to stick around and find out what it is. There was no noise of a party, no music, no talking, no laughing. It was silent, completely, piercingly silent. I started tugging at my boyfriend's arm, knowing he'll understand I'm feeling scared. He takes my hand and gives me a reassuring squeeze and a look that says, "Don't worry." I try not to. The guy at this point had gone pretty quiet compared to his non-stop chatting on the journey, mumbling incoherent words, some English, some Italian. He led us to a door at the end of the hallway, and it opened up to reveal a large balcony that mimicked a garden. The floor was astroturf, and lawn chairs were dotted around. There was a table with speakers, alcohol and cigarettes covering it. To be quite frank, it was a shithole. But we were too occupied and shocked by the fact that we had been promised a party, and all we could see was ourselves, this weird balcony, and this even weirder, older guy. The guy spoke to us for a few moments, and my boyfriend asked him sternly where everyone else was. He mumbled something about them turning up soon, and said he was going to get some of his friends from another room to introduce us. When he said this, he smiled in a way that made me feel desperate to escape. That smile, to me, spoke volumes of this party, a party which I knew would not be a good time for us. He left the balcony door open, and I watched him walk to the other door on the left. He knocked and spoke in what I assumed was to be Italian. I heard several male voices respond, also in the same language. The 3 of us turned to face each other. "We need to get the fuck out of here," I said, whispering. "I know, don't worry, we will," my boyfriend said, and he began talking quickly about a plan. The plan was to simply bolt it into the door and run down the stairs next to the elevator. While we were deciding what to do, I saw the guy enter his friend's room and close the door behind him. This was our chance. "Go," my boyfriend said, and without a second thought, all 3 of us pegged it down the hallway to the door. It had several locks on it, and I could feel myself sweating and prickling profusely with fear as my boyfriend was fumbling to unlock the door. As the last lock opened, I heard the men in the other room talking progressively louder, as if they were getting nearer and closer. And finally, the door opens. We fly down the staircase and sped out of there as fast as we could. My heart was beating out of my chest. Any alcohol we had drank before this was definitely out of my system. Adrenaline took over. We made sure to run as fast as we could and did not stop the entire way back to our hotel. I'm not sure what this guy's intentions were, but what I am sure of is that they were not good. There was never going to be a party.
It was a time when a buddy had 6 people over for a night, including me. His place was on the edge of a suburb. There are a lot of woods around the place that always makes me think of the forest when I see them. Anyway, 7 of us were in the house, having a grand old time playing Elder Sign and drinking soda pop and eating pizza. We eventually decided to call it a night. Everyone went to sleep on the floor in the living room, except for me, since caffeine really makes it hard for me to nod off. I was also the one closest to the back door. About 30 minutes after everyone else was asleep, I heard some rustling outside. I kept my ears open, and I started to hear tapping on the back door. It was really quiet. No one else woke up from it. I was sure that it was just one of the guys trying to mess with me. So I got up and peered through the blinds. Someone wearing a skull mask was out there. I jumped a bit. Even after he noticed me, he kept tapping. So I whispered through the glass, "Come on man, knock it off." He still kept tapping though. I turned around to find out which of the guys it was by counting the heads poking out of the sleeping bags. I counted 6. All of my buddies were inside. The tapping stopped. I turned back around and the guy was now pressed against the door, trying to open it. At this point, I was almost frozen with fear. I dropped the blind I was peering through and backed away slowly. Then I heard something. I don't know how to describe it. It was muffled and pretty far away at first, but it didn't seem to come closer. Eventually, it got close enough that the guy stopped trying to open the door. The sound seemed to jump forward and change to more of a roar. The guy outside screamed bloody murder and booked it. The sound followed him. Both came to an abrupt stop after a few seconds. All of the guys jumped up in panic. They asked me what the hell was going on, and I was still frozen. One of the guys shook me, while another 2 got up to look out of the windows. They saw nothing. When I was shaken, I came back to my senses and told him what had happened. Normally I don't think he would have believed me, but I heard that guy scream. We called the police about, and they said they would look into it. We never saw anything on the news about it though. The next morning, we decided to go out in the woods to look for the guy. Normally we wouldn't do that, but 2 of us were packing heat, so we went. Nothing was out of the ordinary, except that we saw a bit of a skull mask on the ground.
This all started last year when I bought my first house. It was a great deal for a piece of property in the area since it was located next to a party house. Strange people were in and out all the time. Lots of screaming at each other late at night. 2 times they knocked on my window to borrow my phone to call the paramedics. It was unpleasant, but most of them were polite and didn't bother me. All but one person. This guy gave me weird vibes from the start. He concerned me one day when I was taking out the trash and introduced himself. I forgot his name almost immediately as I was in a hurry and didn't really want to talk. He started hounding at me for my own name, which I gave reluctantly, not wanting to be a rude neighbor since I was going to live there for a while. He then pressed me for the last name and who my parents were. None of this is particularly strange since we were both First Nation, and it's common for people to know each other through familial ties. I look quite young and often mistaken for a 16-year-old, and since he looked at his 40s, I didn't think much of it. Just someone wanting to know if we're related or something, I thought. The whole time he stood way too close, about 2 inches away from me. I started getting uncomfortable when he asked me if my parents were home. I live alone with my dog, but I didn't want him to know that. So I said they were home, at their home technically, not a lie. He then asked me if I work, where I work. I told him I had to go and just carried on my way. He then asked me if I want to come party and motioned towards the seemingly empty party house. This was all in the middle of the day. Extremely uncomfortable, I ended up not answering and just going back into my house. A few times after that, he tried to talk to me while taking out the garbage, and being the wimp I was back then, I just pretended I didn't hear him. He'd carry on the conversation himself, one-sided, or just repeated my name trying to get my attention. but never said anything particularly alarming. I figured I gave him an inch by talking to him once, and now he's trying to buddy up to me for some favor or something. I wish that was it, but it was not. About 2 months later, my root cellar flooded because a water line to the party house broke. My cellar is a rusty metal staircase that goes down into a concrete hole with no other exit beyond the stairs, which led up to the front yard. This was typically covered with a heavy hatch that sits as a part of my deck. I was in the middle of taking buckets of water out when I saw the guy standing up at the top of the staircase, blocking my path. I was terrified. The cellar is soundproof because it's under my house, and I was home alone, as I said before. My dog was in the house upstairs, which I did not have access to. I didn't have my phone with me because I didn't want it to get wet. The guy asked me, "What are you doing?" I told him my cellar was flooded, and he took a step down the stairs. I stepped back into the water, and he advanced after me. I told him it was okay, I have it handled, and that he needed to be careful because the water could be electrically charged, and that I was safe because I was wearing rubber boots. Thankfully, that got him to stop, and he left without saying a word. I waited a couple of minutes to make sure he was gone before booking it up the stairs back into my house. The next day, I made sure to get a pump for my family friend so I wouldn't have to be stuck in the cellar for long periods of time alone. The guy continued to try talking to me from time to time, but as the water was shut at the party house, he seemed to be showing up less and less. Eventually, the building was evicted. Some people still wandered around the property from time to time, but never him. It was torn down some months later. Time passed and fall came around. A knock at my door. As you may have guessed it was the same neighbor, the same one I haven't seen for quite some time. I open the door, and all he says to me is, "Do you remember me?" I said I've never seen him in my life, and I have no idea who he is. The guy looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Have a safe night." He then turned around and left. I'm not sure what to make of this. I decided to write this story down, just in case anything happens and he does decide to come back. I can only hope I don't have to write about this ever again.